Okay, let's go to 7C, which is near-term strategies.
Good morning. Carl Leszewski, lead engineer. I'm here to talk about the next phase of near-term strategies. Those are things that can and should be done in the next 5 to 10 years while the larger issues of water conveyance and habitat restoration are being sorted out. We came to the last meeting with a set of 21 proposed strategies that we thought were responsive to what the goal is, and we received some directions from the council, things that you wanted us to do. So with your forbearance, I'll read what the directions were. We were told to focus on a few strategies. Do something to prove you can do anything, I believe was the phrase that was used. We were encouraged to develop some criteria, and several criteria were suggested. Obviously, we had to promote the co-equal goals. We wanted to develop strategies that would produce measurable results in the next 5 to 10 years. All the beneficiaries of these of actions that were taken under these strategies should help pay for it. At least some of the strategies should test the best available science and adaptive management goals that are set forth in the Delta Plan. And the strategies should be selected in a way that address both statewide and Delta community interests. Further directions that we were given was assume that $1 billion will be available from state or other sources. The strategy should be things that state and federal governments can use to make decisions about particular actions in the Delta. And finally, let the elected officials determine how to allocate funding among the various projects. Don't get into that level of detail. We went back to the office and strategized about this. We came up with some additional criteria that we think logically fall out from the directions that we were given by the council and by suggestions that were made by public members who commented on this. One was that the strategy should support or correspond with at least some of the actions put forth by various ad hoc coalitions, for example, the Coalition to Support Delta Projects. They should be ready to proceed within 5 to 10 years, or there's no good in having them on this list. And they should incorporate the innovative governance that we call for in the Delta Plan, including some accountability for measurable outcomes. So with that by way of background, I'll briefly go through the strategies that we selected. They fall into 3 categories: improving the reliability of California's water supplies, restoring the Delta ecosystem, and protecting the Delta as a place. We thought that 3 strategies, or I should say we selected 3 strategies under each of these general categories. Firstly, under improving the reliability of California's water supplies, we believe that an appropriate near-term strategy would be to provide better protection for the so-called freshwater pathway, that is the water courses that convey water from the Sacramento and the San Joaquin rivers to the export pumps. This will incidentally improve flood protection for the Central Delta and South Delta. Secondly, reduce vulnerabilities in the current state water project. Those were elaborated upon at some length last time. And thirdly, through the integrated region. Yes.
Could you elaborate on what these institutional barriers are? Are you going to read the rest of this section, or provide some color to some of the points that are contained in it?
The institutional barriers, as Greg Zlotny pointed out last time, are problems with hiring at the Department of Water Resources, the fact that they have been subjected to the broad-scale restrictions on the furloughs and other things that have been taken, actions have been taken to deal with the budget crisis. And finally, paying for a higher rate of compensation because people tend to get jobs other places.
How can we influence those? How can you remove those barriers?
One of the things that's a challenge for the Department of Water Resources is getting sufficient attention from the other state agencies or control agencies on these issues so that they can effectively get some relief from the restrictions that they've been under. A typical problem, for example, is their hydroelectric plant operators and their pumping plant operators go through a long apprenticeship before they're fully able to work. They may complete that apprenticeship and within months afterwards take a job with Southern California Edison or the Department of Water and Power. And so, having the council as an ally with the department to confirm that these are serious problems and to work with them as they talk with other control agencies that can help them get some relief would be one of the ways that we could be helpful. Just by verifying that, having the council itself express concern about this and point out the opportunity that it presents to improve the reliability of the state's water supply would be valuable for the department.
In that case, who is the decision maker? Who is empowered to make that decision?
Governor on a good portion. For example, State Water Project is a special fund agency. It's not a general fund agency, paid for by the water contractors overwhelmingly. The operations and maintenance is a water contractor obligation. The governor's office, for I think good budget reasons, has been hesitant to give special fund agencies dispensation on hiring and salary adjustments while the rest of the state workforce during the recession is not able to, you can understand the management implications of that. On the other hand, all the signs preliminarily are that the relatively good budget news I mentioned earlier, we only have a $1.9 billion shortfall this year, not the big ones, suggests that the furlough program will probably not be reapplied after the end of June in the next budget year. Not guaranteed yet. Won't know for sure until the governor's January budget, maybe the May revision, but that seems likely. There's probably an opportunity to take a look at federal special fund agencies. This is an issue where the governor's office was willing to accommodate some requests from emergency services, state police, emergency fire services during fire protection season, where the spending and the hiring and so on limitations generally applied were lifted, at least for a point of time. The Department of Water Resources has made this request many times. Water contractors actually have agreed on the general request on hiring and recruitment and so on. The stories are replete. I don't know, are the pumps up at Oroville still down, the 4 pumps out of 6? I mean, there's a story that is the keystone, largest part of the state's water project in California, and 4 of the pumps were offline for the inability to pay the compensation to hire the highest, these are giant machinery, to hire the competent people to maintain and service and repair those operations. Add all that together, you need a plausible argument to make. This is the time to make it. I like the idea, and have told Director Callum this, that the only way to get that problem solved is to say it helps us solve one of the goals of the state of California, which is a more reliable water supply for California. This is not simply a compensation issue for people. That's related, but that ought not to be the driver. In this context of near-term actions, it is probably a more intelligible direction. There are other aspects of the operation and maintenance of the State Water Project. My personal opinion should be accelerated. It's not a state general fund cost. It's not a state cost, it's a contractor's cost. Those things that can, achieve marginal increases in water reliability, by God, we ought to do that. That's, that makes sense. I think those are the kinds of examples. But the general principle is out there.
I would suggest that you use the economic outcome.
Yeah.
If you don't do this, then the economic effect could be awful.
Okay. The second major category is restoring the delta ecosystem. These are things like accelerating the progress towards the restoration goals that are set forth in the biological opinions. There are a number of very good project areas that have currently been identified. We talked about one this morning. There are others. And we need to start making progress on these things because we will have to restore an awful lot of acreage in order to meet those goals. Managing existing non-native invasive species and preventing the introduction and establishment of new non-native species. This is a real difficult problem. There are non-native species that are introduced by ocean-going vessels all the time, and it's probably going to be impossible to prevent new ones from arriving in California, but measures need to be taken, boat inspections and other things like that. That's something that needs to be done in the near term.
Would that be a case, Carl, of enforcing existing laws, procedures that aren't being done, or
exactly
establish new ones?
Both.
The opportunity with the short term in managing invasive species is to make certain that the new system of recreational boat inspections that's been authorized by the legislature in the last year is effectively implemented. It'll be a way that every recreationist in the Delta realizes that the state is then taking special care, because we'll all experience every time we put our boat in the water that someone's looking to make sure we're not introducing invasive species. And also the Science Board and others have recommended some particular focus for the ongoing work of the Department of Boating and Waterways to control invasive weeds. The restoration actions that are proposed in the BDCP and other recommendations really rely on the ability to carry out some large-scale controls of invasive weeds that we don't right now have the confidence really know how to do that. And so some large-scale experiments in that are in order in that regard.
And if I can add just one more point. I'm sorry.
I said, Gloria, did you have a question? Okay.
Oh, just another point on that. The state actually has an aquatic nuisance species management plan, so that might be another avenue, again, in the role of maybe daylighting, supporting, being an ally for the activities that are listed in that might be a way to achieve some enforcement.
Let me just respond. I like the approach and the way you're going. I have a couple of suggestions. And I thought this little box chart on the back, although it's not perfect, is probably a better way to look at it than just the memo itself, and I just want to walk through and make a couple points. I agree that water supply reliability, ecosystem restoration, delta as a place is a logical, obvious, and right place for us to start the categories. Where you have the phrase protect freshwater pathways, I thought your textual discussion in the staff memo, page 2, under improve the reliability of the water supplies, of saying by improving levees on islands adjacent to channels that convey water through the delta to export pumps is in fact a superior way to describe what you're doing. Understand in a chart you have to shorthand, but there was something, it was what you were suggesting, as I understand it, is that to protect the existing water conveyance system, spending on levees that might clearly or significantly or dramatically improve protection, that's the goal that you want. You do not have a qualifier. And so you say improving levees. Every levee that's adjacent to a channel? Is every stretch of every levee equally important to the existing convey. I mean, I am doubtful that every stretch of every levee adjacent to channels that convey water, and there are many channels, is equally important. I would suggest you consider a qualifier, significant improvements, or something. I have no idea what it is, but when you set a principle, use a statement that doesn't just, will be read as saying, every levee along any channel that connects to anything else that connects to the main channels that can provide water to the conveyance facilities, that will be viewed as a statement of entitlement. That isn't what you mean, and you need some clarification on that. Number two, second point, I thought the State Water Project reliability is a very valid second point under reliability. I like that a lot. But I'm with Hank. I think you ought to give some illustrations. And I don't object to saying we can't hire the people for the pumps in Oroville, but and I know that Oroville isn't in the Delta, but for God's sakes, it controls a good portion of the flow that gets down to the Delta and goes somewhere. But I want the other stuff that clearly illustrates Hank's point, that can be understood by the reader, that motivate this category of spending. The IRW PM projects to reduce reliance on the Delta, I like the concept of that. I think, however, what you're really going to wind up doing is saying that priority should be given by all existing funding agencies to projects which do that. Because otherwise you're implying that, we're going to go through a process. I just suggest that for your consideration. Under the ecosystem restoration parts, I believe that what you mean by restore habitat is try to comply with existing legal obligations under the biological opinions, which are the same things that BDCP is talking about for early stage restoration activity, or at least part of them are. A more definitive statement somewhere of that might be useful. I'm with Hank. I'm skeptical. We could spend all the money that existed in the world on managing non-native invasive species. I think you need a much more focused subset, footnote, something that doesn't get us lost in the 900 ideas that are out there on invasive species, as if you want to order all of them. However, I did not understand why an improved use of science in water project operations is under ecosystem restoration, when in fact, you'll know from Dr. Goodwin's presentation in the next item, that the governor and the secretary of the Department of Interior said that science, higher level of science, is going to guide both ecosystem restoration and water exports. And for me, that is an overarching issue. It's not just water. It's not just ecosystem. It's water reliability. It's ecosystem, and it relates to Delta's place. I think it's important to include this higher level of science with all that it implies. I think it's logical to talk about giving recognition to the ideas in the Delta Plan, as Carl indicated, that talk about adaptive management and a more, for God's sakes, an understandable and efficient governance structure. But it doesn't work sitting in the middle of ecosystem. It doesn't. It just doesn't explain itself. On the third category, Delta's place, wildlife-friendly farming is good. Footnote, protecting the Delta as it currently exists is also done with spending on existing levees in some way. And I don't think you should ignore the fact that your very first category under water supply reliability, protect freshwater pathways, may have significant benefits to property owners and residents within the Delta in terms of flood protection, and that should be highlighted somewhere. I thoroughly like the Lower San Joaquin River bypass, the discussion today of the South Delta configuration by the Institute only reinforced the complexity of that system and the flood dangers that exist right up against urban development and the need to move fast there. Flag me down as understanding the politics, but questioning whether you want to start funding cultural and historical interpretations as part of this. I'm open on ideas, but it seems to me levee work that provides safety and protection to property owners, wildlife-friendly farming support that may well do it, and lower San Joaquin bypass protection is a whole lot for unique characteristics in the Delta, and starting to do the money that was requested in the 43 projects by the Coalition for a History Center and an Interpretive Center and whatever else is. That's what I meant by details of spending that are perhaps better handled by elected officials than us, but take that as an observation only. Just last point. I don't think you can limit projects we recommend to projects that are supported by one of the ad hoc coalitions created to support Delta projects, as it appears to be the case. They did not include automatically projects that meet the criteria of state water project reliability, one of the big blocks you've got there. Now, maybe by implication, some of the levee projects would. These are, rather than three other criteria, these are really notations. Support by a local coalition gives added oomph to an idea. But to say you must have support from a local coalition means they can veto any project simply by not providing the support. One reading of the staff memo is that the support is necessary. It is, after all, as you say, a criteria. Shovel-ready, I am skeptical. I've never seen a shovel-ready project. All of our discussion for McCormick-Williamson shows the major elements are there, but the details aren't done. I'd be cautious about shovel-ready. We've never, in 50 years of public life, I have never seen a shovel-ready project except for projects that are fully funded by local agencies who wish to have somebody give them money to reimburse them for what they've already spent. And that is not quite what I think you had in mind. Then the innovative government relates to the science and governance structure I mentioned. So I think this is moving in the right direction.
Mr. Chairman?
Sir.
Just from a process standpoint, I mean, this is all well and good. I think the priorities are correct and all the rest of that. But I think it really is important to do a timeline. When it's going to begin, when it's going to end, what are the key activities, and when are those key activities going to be completed, and who is responsible for each activity, and how much is the thing going to cost, and the economic impact when it's finished. And that certainly would help us understand more of what you're trying to do.
That would be a tall order in the schedule on which we're trying to work. I mean, our thinking was partly encouraged by conversations with the council to put together a package of near-term priorities that agencies would also be anxious to move ahead with, so that we're working with willing partners. To do that in a time frame that we could be suggesting ideas that might be relevant to the next budget, which means we have to either looking for items that agencies are thinking about right now that they've submitted draft budgets to deal with these things. If we get a short list of high priority actions, then that would become one of the items that we take to the implementation committee. Here's things that the council believes would be worthy of your attention in the immediate
and what
future.
What sort of detail will you take with that?
Not a lot, because the agencies that are part of those of the implementation committee, they're the ones who have the detail. So our staff is out talking now with those agencies to understand better where they're at, to realize what the complexities or the barriers that are preventing them from moving ahead. But we're relying on their information and them to be the leaders of them. They're the agencies who have the duty to carry out these actions.
But we really have to be the integrator and the coordinator.
Yeah.
And I mean, if I were on that committee and you brought me something in rough format, I mean, you'd have to do all the work. I don't think it's a tall order to come up with those timelines as we discuss. You're really talking detail. If you're talking it's going to take roughly 3 years to do this, before we start, we have to know A, B, C, and D. And then these are the 4 or 5 key activities. This is when they have to be done. This is who's responsible. That's no big deal. I mean, it's no big deal in business to put that together. And if you went before a board or any sort of committee that didn't have that, you'd leave the room immediately. And I'm saying we should be able to do that in politics as well. Unless there's a miscommunication here, I don't see why this is a tall order. And if you need some help, I'll help you. And again, it ain't going to be right, but it's going to be something we can talk about and go from there.
Okay.
Okay, Randy, then Gloria.
Well, I want to add to what Phil and Hank have mentioned. I think the missing element in this write-up is what are the agencies currently working on, and what are they currently planning? And I know that you were given direction to avoid specifics and deal with framework, but our job is not to operate in theory, but to operate in practicality. And I think it does a disservice to the agencies that have the responsibilities to carry out actions to help restore the delta and provide a more reliable supply of water, not to even mention them in the short list of near-term strategies. That's got to be the starting point, for heaven's sakes. Some of the things that are on the list of 42 that we've looked at are projects that are already underway. So let's start with that. And I agree with Hank. I don't think it's a tall order to ask for an evaluation of what's currently underway and funded, what's planned for and not funded as a starting point, and then the second element that's missing is the involvement of the Delta Science Program. Because to achieve the co-equal goals, there's got to be an agreement up front as to what the problem is, and then to determine with best available science what approach are we going to take to fix that, and then after it's implemented, how are we going to monitor it to determine if it's working the way it should and whether or not it needs to be adaptively managed. Is the best time to start is with our near-term actions and to get the Delta Science Program involved at the front end and not the back end. So I commend staff for doing what you were asked to do. You've developed a framework. The chart on the final page is a good one to highlight the kinds of priorities that we need to be considering. But I believe we need to start with the projects that are already identified and funded or identified and not funded by the agencies that are responsible for carrying out the activities, and then get our Delta Science Program involved in whatever it is that the implementation committee or this council decides we want to emphasize and move forward on, so that we have best available science as the projects or activities are contemplated.
Donna.
I think
I'm sorry, Gloria. Excuse me. Gloria, then Donna.
Well, Randy and Hank kind of said most of what I wanted to say, but I just wanted to emphasize again, thank you, Hank, for always trying to make sure that the information is useful and it makes sense in terms of what we're doing. And thank all of you for doing what you did. But is there a priority in terms of the categories when you look at the strategies or whatever? Is there some priority as it relates to our co-equal goals when you look at projects? And I do agree you always should evaluate what's going on first, but when you look at the strategies, is there a priority being taken into consideration? And I know these are 5 to 10 year projects, and I think you indicated you've recommended the state legislature will determine the cost, where the funding will be. But is there a priority in terms of where you look at the strategies?
You can take a stab at this.
Well, I would just think that we recognize that these are all things that are important to do. We haven't gone through and said, restoring the ecosystem is more important than doing water supply reliability. All of these things seem to be actions that can be taken within a reasonable period of time with existing funds. So we have not gone through and said, gee, it would be more important to accelerate progress toward tidal marsh and floodplain restoration than it would be to do a more effective job managing invasive species. We're not trying to do that, or it's more important to improve the reliability of levees along the freshwater pathway than it would be to accelerate progress in the lower San Joaquin River bypass. Those are projects that have got, in large part, different fund sources, different partners. They're moving on different tracks. And so we haven't really tried to set priority amongst those we've listed here. Now, there are some things that were proposed that aren't listed on this list. Actions that weren't likely to move ahead in the near term. They're too controversial, they aren't well enough designed, or things that didn't seem as visible. If we were to, one thing, we could go through and identify all the actions state agencies are doing, all the water quality initiatives that the Water Board is working on in the Central Valley, all the various actions that the Department of Water Resources has taken to improve the reliability of the state water project and companion projects at the Bureau side, all the various actions that the Anadromous Fish Restoration Program is taking to do fisheries actions. We were trying to focus in on a relatively small handful of high-priority visible projects that seemed to have momentum behind them and that had existing fund sources, and where we thought we sensed that agencies were ready to move ahead now.
Was there any consideration of the difficulties of the projects?
Certainly, yeah, but part of what we've tried to do was identify things that we think can move ahead. Mm-hmm. Certainly some projects, there's barriers in front of them now. Each of the ecosystem restoration projects, the tidal marsh and floodplain projects, folks have a dozen reasons why they haven't moved ahead in a decade in some cases. But I think we realize we have to move those programs ahead, and we think by focusing on them, bringing attention to them, we can get the kind of progress here that we see in other regions that also have trouble moving projects ahead but seem to have done a better job at restoration than we have in the Delta.
Thank you.
Don, then Chris.
Yeah, I certainly want to thank staff for their continued work on this. And I just maybe speaking to the category of the Delta as a place that I think when I suggested at the last meeting that you look at some of the things that might be ready to proceed and related to some of the gateway opportunities to provide for better opportunities for folks to, one, learn about the Delta, but also to some of the facilities might go with that. And I think you capture some of that in the sub-C. But one of the things that occurred to me as I was reading this was that, the Legislation Reform Act called for the Delta Investment Fund. Obviously, it wasn't under this category, but I guess I kind of pondered whether or not, people might question a project or not, or whether it's ready or meets certain criteria. But this might be an opportunity in working with both the Delta Protection Commission and the Conservancy, and to maybe there's some implementation called for as a follow-on to the Economic Sustainability Plan, but also some other activities that are called out for in the legislation. It would seem to me this might be an opportunity to direct, and maybe to a specific aspect of that, to really, because right now the Delta Investment Fund has $0 in it, as I understand. Maybe sit that way for a while with the state budget situation, but this might be a way to, again, under existing criteria, existing funding for programs, to have an activity that coincides with a near-term project and or something that's deliverable. And I would like to see us, because I think go to the act that was called for in legislative action, and see if there's an opportunity to work, again, certainly along the lines of things you've described here. I don't disagree with any of these, but I would hope, again, I put that as another aspect of maybe a way to begin to implement, but also to build upon that whole focus in on investing in the Delta and its various aspects. Bless you. So again, I throw it out there, Dan. I don't know if you or Cindy have any reaction to that, or Carl, but it occurred to me that this might be an opportunity, not to redirect money, but to really begin to utilize that, what the concept was, in a meaningful way under the near-term actions in the next 5 to 10 years, to see something happening under the guise of the Delta Investment Fund, reinvesting, but also consistent with the local goals, and certainly with Delta as a place, and trying to do some work there. So I offer that as another thought as you're continuing to put this together.
Okay. I'm sorry. Sure, Chris. My apologies.
One thing I had wanted to bring up is we've been struggling with this question and a lot of these exact points that the council has brought up. And one of the things is our role in bringing these near-term strategies forward. It's important to keep in mind that we don't hold dollars to disperse, or we're not giving some power to grant projects to go forward, but we have a voice, I think, in the science community, as well as the greater community of interested agencies and publics to see that this goes forward. And so one of the questions that we're struggling with is how to make that happen as quickly and as efficiently as possible. One of the things that we talked about earlier was the implementation committee. And this does seem like an area where we can add a very positive benefit to the programs of other agencies by highlighting the projects that they're going forward, as well as bringing forward other projects that they're planning to implement. And by highlighting those, encourage funding of those projects. So that's one thing that we'd like to see go forward that I think will more directly address, I think, everyone's underlying concern that how do we get something to happen as soon as possible. And so that's our approach.
Chris, that's great. I strongly support that direction. There was a Senate subcommittee hearing that was held in Martinez 2 weeks ago and was focused expressly on near-term actions. And to the casual observer, you would have left that hearing thinking that nothing is being done and that, oh my goodness, we've got a list of projects. We better get going on this because we've got a disaster on our hands in the Delta. I think we can provide a great service to our other agency brethren by doing just exactly what you said, highlighting the activities that are already underway and those that would like to be implemented if they had enough funding. That's part of our coordinating and synthesizing role, I think, and it would be very valuable at this point in time to get that out there. Dan, you said you avoided providing that list, but if we got one, put it on the web. Let's get it out there. Let people know that there is activity, that there are things going on, and the agencies are working hard with the limited resources to make some improvements as they're able.
And the risk, Randy, in this circumstance specifically, is putting out a list before the other agencies agree to it, and we create some discomfort among them. So we are going forward very quickly to, in fact, get that together.
Okay.